So, in summarizing our properties, we talked about the fact that viruses are extremely small, and they're so small that they actually violate the cell doctrine that all living things are made of cells. So we find that viruses, by the first definition, actually fail as being alive because they aren't cellular. So that brings us to our next definition. The next definition has to do with vital properties. And this definition suggests that if we looked at viruses and we took about all the things that are true about viruses, we could actually make a collective definition of what a virus is. So we can define a virus by what it does. Like all living things, viruses make more copies of themselves. So by that part, it's okay. So we have reproduction or self-reproduction. Living things also are able to take in materials, raw materials they eat. They also give off waste products, they excrete. Living things move, and they have movement both inside the cells and inside the organism, like your food moves through you, and they also have external movement. So even things like plants can move in response to environmental factors like the sun. Living things can use energy in order to make things. They can also build different parts. This is called anabolism, and they can sense the environment. So if they have ways of seeing whether or not there's a lot of glucose to eat, or whether or not it's too hot and they should move. So this is called signal transduction. Living things also have the ability to sense their internal environment and see how they're doing. Do they need more food? Do they need more water? And living things can integrate or communicate between the various parts, and depending on how big the organism is, we might communicate with nerves, signals, or we might communicate with hormones or other ways. Living things have the ability to try to maintain their state. This is called homeostasis. They can grow and they can change. Okay, so how do viruses do on this vital properties definition? Well, let's go back through this list. We said viruses do very well on the first thing. They're able to reproduce. At least they're able to reproduce with the help of cells, which they take over. But they can't eat, and they can't excrete, and they can't move, and they can't make energy or use energy. They can't make proteins. They can't do any of these other things. And that's why they need cells. They need cells in order to help them carry out the processes that would allow them to reproduce. So by our second definition, the vital properties definition, the collection of properties that make up what is a living thing, or that all living things have in common, again, viruses fail miserably. So by the second definition, we probably would not consider viruses to be alive. So that brings us to the third definition, and the third definition focuses in on this ability to reproduce. And the third definition suggests that all living things possess and process biological information in order to carry out the things they need to do and in order to make more copies of themselves. So let's talk about what the central dogma of biology does. It describes the flow of biological information. Now, I often say that a dogma is something that's true until it isn't. Okay, so dogma is something that we think about, it's always the case, and then somehow we discover that we were wrong. Sometimes there's exceptions, and so the central dogma is no exception to the dogma that that a dogma is something that's true until it isn't. Okay, so let's see what Crick was talking about. He showed this diagram here, which is the flow of biological information. And this is an organizing principle that allows us to think about what goes on, different processes in living things. Ultimately, what the central dogma is telling us is that biological information for making plants and people, is there in order to make proteins, and most of the interesting machines and structures inside the cell are actually comprised of this biological material, protein. So in carrying out that process, we have the biological material, we have the ultimate product that's making up the machines and the structures, and we have this intermediate, which is called the messenger. And the messenger is another chemical called mRNA, or messenger RNA. So we have the DNA, which is the genetic material or the biological information. We have the messenger, which tells how to make these structures and machines. So what we see here is that the flow of biological information, as expressed in the central dogma, is